between the global Asian American Pacific Islander caucus, as well as Democrats Abroad China and Democrats Abroad Hong Kong. My name is Cory Lemke. I serve as the Vice Chair of Democrats Abroad Republic of Korea. I also serve as one of the co-chairs of the Global Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus. Just to introduce our panel here, we have Kimberly Wong, who is the chairperson of Democrats Abroad China and is a serial entrepreneur based out of Shanghai and is currently a fashion designer with her brand Cucumber. In the past, she was a healthy food restaurateur and advisor to China's first food education program founded at the World Economic Forum to integrate nutrition and sustainability called Food Heroes. She is hugely interested in growing the dialogue in the Asian American community based in Asia and is passionate about creating positive systemic social change. Our other panelist is Nicholas Gordon, who is the chair of Democrats Abroad Hong Kong. He is the deputy regional vice chair for the Asia Pacific region and is also involved with the Global Youth Caucus. In his day job, he's a writer and researcher for a sustainable development think tank and is also a commentator on local and regional issues for print and radio. So welcome to our panelists. Introducing our director, Yi Chen is a documentary filmmaker based in Washington, D.C. She is a Soros Equality Fellow and DC Arts and Humanities Fellow. Her feature debut, First Vote, is currently in distribution in a variety of festivals throughout the world. Her work has received grants from the Ford Foundation, Open Society Foundations, Center for Asian American Media, ITVS, DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Carton Quinn Films, and Southern Documentary Fund. She's been featured in the Washington Post, NPR, and NBC4. Yi was named Filmmaker of the Month by DC Film Office in 2013. She is a member of Asian American Documentary Network and Brown Girls Doc Mafia. Yi also holds an MFA in Film and Media Arts from American University and also serves as an adjunct professor, or has served as an adjunct professor at George Mason University. So welcome to our director. Just kind of as a preface to begin this panel, the director requested, for those who have viewed the film, to complete a survey, a brief survey about their thoughts and, just to get thoughts and things like that and feedback. So I will put the link down in the chat box for that. And if you can make a donation to help cover the costs of the licensing for us, I will also post a link to that at democratsabroad.org, also in the chat box here. So just some housekeeping things there. So maybe just to get started here, maybe Yi Chen, you could tell us a little about maybe like what was your inspiration for this film? You could start there.
Yeah, Cory. So I started the project after the 2016 election, so early 2017. And so just a little bit about my own background. I was actually born and grew up in Shanghai, and I moved to the United States in 2003 after I graduated from college. Last year, I became a citizen, and 2020 is actually my first time voting. So when I started the project in 2017, I was interested in exploring voters in my own community on both sides of the aisle. And I was particularly interested in first-time voters in battleground states. So that's how the project started. And the title First Vote, part of it is there are characters in the film that are first-time voters, and also I'm also a first-time voter myself. I was becoming a first-time voter myself.
Yeah, no. So the film features four voters, two Chinese American Trump supporters, um, two Democratic supporting Chinese Americans. Um, how did you choose your subjects? What was interesting about these four stories? Um, in terms of like geographic location, their background, what they did. How did you choose these four people?
Yeah, so initially I was looking for um, first-time voters who voted for the first time in 2016, and I was looking for characters on both sides and also in battleground states. So those were like the three things I kind of set out for myself. Um, so so one of the things that really surprised me and interested me or intrigued me was in 2016 there was a this movement, this new phenomenon of Chinese Americans for Trump. So I actually read about them, on PBS, on Economist, which was something very new. At least to me, that was very new. One is I hadn't really seen such passionate participation and very actively doing things. Like they flew aerial banners, they actually established a political action committee, they fundraised for candidates, and they did a lot of things. So and the other thing, so so that was kind of the start point that kind of intrigued me to look more into it. So I started out by looking for members from that movement, which I actually didn't know anyone uh, in that movement directly. So I just asked around people I know. So I live in DC, so I could just ask people I know, and they just tell me, oh, you should talk to this person. And so basically I talked to a lot of people, and eventually I did get in touch with Chinese Americans for Trump movement. I interviewed a lot of them, maybe 20 or 30 of them, but they all, it was good research information, but none of them wanted to be in a film. However, there's some of them in Virginia actually told me that they listened to this Chinese language podcast on WeChat by this guy in Ohio. So I thought that was interesting because multiple people told me about him. So that's how. So I looked him up, and he's a professor at University of Dayton. So his email was on the website. So I emailed him, and then I talked to him on the phone. So yeah, so I asked him if I could film him doing his podcast, and he said yes. So so I ended up flying to Dayton in June 2017. So it actually took me 5-6 months because I started the project in January 2017. So yeah, so that's how I found Lens. And then Sue, kind of similar story, because also multiple people told me, oh, you should look her up. She ran for Congress in 2016 in North Carolina. She was already known, and some of my friends, they're journalists, so they already interviewed her in 2016. So they're like, oh, she's an interesting character. Yeah, so that's how I found out about Sue. And Kaiser, I found an article. So he wrote an article for SubChina. I was doing research, and his article title was perfect. Why so many first-generation Chinese immigrants support Trump, right? That was exactly what I was researching for. So, yeah, so I actually couldn't find his email, but I found him on LinkedIn. So I sent him a LinkedIn message. He responded. He's like, sure, call me. So I called him. He was picking up his kids from school, and he's like, oh, sure, yeah, you can film me if you come to North Carolina. And he knew about Sue Guj, actually. He knew about Sue Guj's campaign. As you saw in the film, he has an opinion about that, very strong opinion. So, yeah, so I actually filmed with these three characters the first year. And I didn't meet Jennifer till early 2018 in Durham. And it was one of the funders for the film, Center for Asian American Media. They had Asian American storytellers in the South convening in Durham. And so they invited Jennifer to give a talk, which she talked about Asian American identity in the South, which really resonated with me because at the time, that was something I started to exploring with the film, the theme of belonging and identity, and how that influenced the characters' voting. So yeah, so I asked her if I could film her classes, and I had to get permission from UNC, but that worked out luckily. So yeah, so I started filming with her in 2018. Yeah, so anyway, long story how I found these characters. Oh, what makes them so? Hopefully you found them interesting. Do you find them to be interesting characters?
I mean, I did find them all interesting characters, I guess, on both sides of the divide. I guess one question I want to ask, and then I'll hand off to other panelists just to follow up, is that all four of them are also, they were all quite politically engaged, as I said. You know, they on the Republican side, you said they set up and were part of Chinese Americans for Trump, running for Congress, which is a pretty, I mean, there's certainly a very high level political activism on that side, but on the other side too. I mean, Kaiser Kuo he's a very prominent podcaster. He was, you know, also doing a lot of political outreach work. The professor, the final subject, was also again very active in discussions about race and identity. I guess is that level? Do you think that level of like activism and engagement helped persuade them to be part of this film? And maybe did you see differences of opinion for those who were less active?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because Sue and Lance, they have already been very active and they're kind of a public figure in a way. So they're more comfortable putting them out there. And the other people I talk to, they're not like that, right? They don't have a podcast. They don't run for office. They're more just like, you know, everyday voters. So they're more private. So yeah, I mean, it definitely like them being, you know, having this public platform. They feel more comfortable being in the documentary, but they also make interesting characters because they're doing so many things, right? They're very actively doing so many things, and all four characters do very bring different aspects in terms of civic engagement and their political participation.
Hi. So jumping off of that, what I'm wondering is, what were the actual like demographic differences that you noticed in the Chinese American community while you were filming?
Yeah, so I think my experience is probably limited to these four characters and the people that I've interviewed, but and I don't really want to generalize without data supporting it, and I really couldn't find the segregated data. So AAPI data 2016 exit survey, 35% Chinese Americans voted for Trump. But you know, and I talked to the team who actually did the survey, and you know, they told me that they don't have that breakdown data in terms of the Chinese Americans, what their backgrounds are, right? So this is like really based on my the people that I interviewed, I guess. And you know, I don't want to generalize, say like first generation immigrants tend to be more Republican, but I've also interviewed a few of them who are actually Democrats, right? And then American-born Asian Americans are more tend to be more Democrat. But I know there are Republican Asian Americans too, right? So yeah, I mean, I would just say that I think Lance and Sue, I would say most of the first generation, like immigrant from China who came here maybe 10, 15 years ago, tend to be more conservative. And I see that a lot on WeChat. And then voters like Kaiser and Jennifer who grew up in the United States, they tend to be more Democrats. And there's also this generational difference as well. Like the younger generation of Asian Americans versus their parents. Their parents tend to be more conservative, and the younger generation tend to be more Democrat. So yeah, but that's just really based on my own observations.
Right, and kind of drawing you out a little bit more on that. We have, we kind of focus on like the American side, I think. But I think what this film really captures and what is really interesting is it does focus on the Chinese side as well, and so all of the participants in the film, like they appeared to be from mainland China, and it seemed that they all were Mandarin primary speakers. Is that correct?
Yeah, all of them except Jennifer doesn't. Excuse me, Jennifer doesn't speak Chinese.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. But I'm kind of curious to know, on the Chinese side, and did you notice or did you perceive perhaps, and of course we're not making huge generalizations here, but on the Chinese side, being from different parts of China, for example, did that influence, their party affiliation or, the way they saw being American, that, where they were from in China? Or being a Cantonese speaker, for example?
Yeah, Kaiser has this interesting theory that Chinese from big cities like Beijing or Shanghai tend to be more Democrats because he lived in Beijing for 20 years, and he said the Chinese he knows in Beijing are not are Democrats, right? So yeah, he has this theory that smaller cities, Chinese from smaller cities tend to be more conservative versus Shanghai, Beijing, big cities tend to be more Democrats. So anyway, so that's what Kaiser told me. So Les is from Qinhuangdao, so he's from Tianjin, and Sue grew up in Hainan Island. So right, and yeah, I actually didn't really talk to anyone who is from like the southern, like from Guangdong. I don't actually remember talking to anyone from that region.
Do you perceive, like, well, even the Cantonese, I mean, maybe, yeah, kind of shifting to language, I mean, or dialect, do you think that would have an impact on, their experience, their views of American politics?
In terms of language, I mean, I feel like in terms of waves of immigration, the earlier generation tend to be more from Hong Kong or from like, even very, very early on, the gold rush or the railroad workers tend to be more from southern, Fujian or Guangzhou, right? And then the recent immigrants tend to be like the last 10 to 15 years, they tend to be more from mainland China. And in between, there are, immigrants from Hong Kong or Taiwan, right? But the most recent tend to be more from mainland China. I feel like, and again, I don't want to generalize, but I mean, I feel like maybe Hong Kong and Taiwan, because they have democracy, so they're already familiar with the democratic process and what that means. So I feel like they have different experience versus Les and Sue and myself, right? Like I grew up in China, which never voted before, and it's not a democracy. So the whole concept of democracy, I really didn't even think about when I was in China, right? So it's not something that I really think about at all, right? So, and it's very, I had to learn about that. And it really takes it takes years to actually learn about. Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel like perhaps that does make a difference, whether someone, where they grew up. Um,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, being somebody who is ABC and my parents are from Hong Kong and Taiwan, like there is definitely, a difference from say like the viewpoints that I saw in the documentary where I was like, wow, like I don't know anybody like this versus kind of like where I grew up, and I just wanted to address actually, even though, in your documentary, all these people are really politically active. What I found, at least in trying to mobilize more API community, is that so much of the response has been, it doesn't affect me. Maybe until like this year when you have a president calling, COVID, the Wuhan virus, and et cetera, right? And I feel like that's kind of like, almost a privilege that a lot of Asian Americans have had, where they feel like that politics and what's going on in the world doesn't really affect them. But what do you think is like a more effective type of messaging that we could share with the Chinese American community so that they can understand what exactly this kind of privilege is and why we should be more civically engaged, not only for ourselves, but for others?
Yeah, so I'm curious, Chinese American or Asian American who told you that it doesn't affect themselves, are they like American born, or are they like immigrants? Like what's their background like? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it would be both, actually. Both.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, um, well, hopefully after they see the movie, they will feel more activated to be politically engaged. What messaging? Yeah, well, hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I guess, the group who are immigrants from China, I've seen a lot of people who um, they're very practical. Like they don't want to give up their Chinese passport because it's convenient for them to visit China and then have green card. They can also live in the United States. It's very practical. And yeah, they don't see a point of voting. I think for people like that, it's part of it is that they don't have experience voting. Like they. So I think voter education is really important. Perhaps like for me, I didn't know that Asian Americans didn't have voting rights till 1952. So for me personally, just learning about that part of history, getting voting rights for women, for African Americans, for Asian Americans, I just thought everybody could vote, right? I didn't know that uh, that you or these group of people had to fight for their voting rights. So I feel like maybe just learning about history for me was helpful to understand that I can't just take it for granted. Um, and voting has consequences because who is on the Supreme Court um, decide a lot of cases like Shelby versus Holder, which basically got rid of part of the Voting Rights Act, requiring if each state want to change their voting laws, they had to go through Department of Justice. But now they don't have to, right? So after that, research has shown that voter ID laws, very strict voter ID laws, has really increased in a lot of, especially southern states, right? So for me, just kind of connecting the dots of how I vote affect a lot of things, affect who is on Supreme Court, affect what case decided, and then like Shelby and Holder, it affects a lot of people's voting rights, right? So yeah, I think for me, just learning about that makes me realize that voting is important, and voting has consequences. And I think we really see in this election how close the margin of victory is, right? It's by thousands of votes, 10,000s of votes. Like, it's actually not that, it's every vote really matters. That's what I have seen in this election. So yeah, I think speaking from my own experiences, these are the things that make me realize that every vote really matters and voting has consequences.
So I'd like to kind of get back to talking about the subjects of the documentary. And it seems like, I mentioned before that they were all quite politically active in various ways. But clearly, there was a process through which they became more active. I don't know about the two on the Democratic supporting side, but at least the two on the Republican side, for sure, they moved to the United States, and then when they were there, they suddenly became much more engaged in politics. In filming them and in talking to all four of the subjects, did you get a sense of what was the thing that got them more engaged? What was their process from moving to the United States and then becoming much more engaged in American politics?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Lance, he actually told me when he was a PhD student at Ohio State University, he actually supported, he couldn't vote back then, right? But he went on rallies for John Kerry's campaign, right? And it wasn't until 2015 that he told me he was at a hotel on a business trip, and he turned on Fox News and he saw Trump speaking, and what Trump said on TV really just struck a chord. Like, it just really resonated with him. And so that's when he decided that he was gonna become a U.S. citizen and vote for him. And I think part of it is everybody is different, and some people, every personality is different. Some people are just not interested in politics. And Lance happened to be somebody who is interested in politics, and Trump's emotional alignment with him really. He's just so passionate, as you can see. He's a very staunch Trump supporter, and it's really interesting. The way he actually reached out to Montgomery County Republican Party. Like, he called them multiple times, he emailed them multiple times, and he didn't hear back from them. So one day he decided to go to their office and actually just go to their office and introduce himself. And then after that, he had a coffee with the local Montgomery County GOP staff. And it was more like an interview, which was really interesting, that they went to a coffee shop and the staff basically kind of interviewed him, like, oh, your background, what do you do, your family, and all that stuff. So, and that after that coffee meeting, he asked her, so what can we do? I really want to campaign for Trump. What can I do? So that's how he got involved with the local GOP party. He started, doing phone banking and door knocking, back in 2016. So he was very proactively seeking out that opportunity, right? It wasn't like somebody knock at his door and say that, oh, you should become a Republican, right? Wasn't like that. So yeah, for Sue, it's the same thing, right? It was her deciding that she wanted to run for office. It wasn't like local GOP like recruited her and be like, you should be a candidate, right? It was really like she really wanted to run for office. So yeah, so for these two characters, actually, I interviewed an MIT professor, Ya-Sheng Huang, and he talked about, he had really great insights, I thought. He talked about the emotional alignment of Trump as an authoritarian figure to voters like Sue and Lance, who actually grew up in an authoritarian country. And even though, excuse me, even though they left China to go to a democracy, but their emotional alignment is still with authoritarianism, and that's what appeals to them, right? When you think about it, it really this movement, Chinese Americans for Trump, really was not just for Republican Party. It was really for Trump, right? So yeah, so I thought that Ya-Sheng Huang had really great insights on that. And I would say Kaiser, his parents was very political. So he got that from his parents. And Jennifer, she, she told me that she grew up in a working class family, and she always wanted the world to be fair, and she always wanted, justice and equality. So yeah, so everyone has different stories and different reasons why they became active or what they do. So I'm actually gonna drop that interview link in the chat if you want to check it out.
Awesome, thank you. And I actually want to ask a question to follow up with that, flipping it around a little bit. So even though you said that at least two of the people in the movie actually sought out the Republican Party, what kind of suggestions might you have for political parties on how to engage with the Chinese American community? And what do you think about the level of engagement that they have had this election cycle?
Yeah. Oh, this election cycle. I mean, I honestly haven't really been paying a lot of attention because I have been working full time on the film's distribution. But I saw, based on what I saw, Biden, I believe he has ads for AAPI community. He has also AAPI. He's done a lot of AAPI outreach in battleground states. I believe Representative Grace Mun leads part of that effort. So yeah, it seems like he's really paying more attention to AAPI voters. I'm not sure what the Republican Party is doing. Like I said, I haven't really been following closely on that. I think that just based on data, like AAPI data in terms of political party campaigns outreach to AAPI community, it's very, I think the number is only like something like 20 or 30% of the Asian American voters that surveyed that reported that they had been contacted by a political party or political campaign. So it's 10 or 15% lower than white or Black voters. So yeah, so I was also doing research on Asian American voter turnout, which 2016 was the highest for Asian American voters since 1996, but it was like 49 point something. It was like below 50%, right? And so it's still relatively, I think there's a 15% racial gap between the highest voter turnout in 2016, which was white voter turnout, versus Asian Americans. So compared to that, voter turnout for Asian Americans are still relatively low. And there's an article by Center for American Progress, you know, kind of, the article is about the reasons behind the low voter turnout, and they cited language access is a reason. 1 in 3 AAPIs are limited English proficiency, and then party outreach is another big reason. So I lost track of your question. I think you asked me, what can political parties do? Yeah, I would say Asian American voters are really diverse, and even very different languages. So, you know, I think one is language resources. So like voting information or materials in language, I think that's really important to reach AAPI community, and having a trusted someone who is trusted by the community, kind of as a bridge to reach out to that community, because sometimes, particularly I would say immigrant community, what I've seen is they tend to be more they're very much they have their own groups, and they're you know, it helps if you have someone that they already trust and know to kind of make that introduction. And yeah, I'm sure there are lots of other ways, and I'm not a political strategist. But yeah.
I wanted to kind of ask you, so the film itself took place after the 2018 midterm elections, correct?
Right. Yeah.
And then it kind of ends there. So obviously, you know, we're living in the COVID world now. My question to you is, you know, with the outbreak of COVID-19, and knowing what you know about, you know, the participants and your interactions with them, do you think the rise of anti-Chinese sentiment in the past year, you know, has changed any of their outlooks? Or do you think maybe they've become more entrenched, or, you know, has something else happened? I'm kind of curious what the impact of COVID-19 has been on, you know, particularly the participants in the film.
Yeah, Cory. So I was getting a lot of these questions with the panels that I was doing. So we actually eventually did a panel with all 4 of them for the first time. So this question actually came up, and the record actually is. I can add that link in the chat. But if you go to the film's website, firstvotefilm.com, if you go to screenings and look for previous screenings, so it's the one at University of Colorado Boulder, and so there's a link there, a recording for that panel with all 4 of the characters together. So yeah, no, they have not changed their mind. So as a matter of fact, Lansing still have really doubled down their support for Trump. So actually, none of the characters have changed their mind.
So I think with that, I have one more. Well, I have one more question, or actually, it's 2 questions. First of all, I mean, where can people find your work, find other things you're working on, and then kind of what's next for you? What are you working on next?
Yeah, Nicholas. So so the film is streaming now until November 19th on PBS website. So you can find it on PBS. You can also stream it on World Channel as well. So that's worldchannel.org, and look for America Reframed. And the film is also playing right now at the AFI Silver Theater virtual screening room. So if you go to the website, actually firstvotefilm.com, go to the screenings page. So all of that information is on the website. and for your audience in Canada, if you have any members in Canada, it's actually also playing at the Vancouver Asian Film Festival. So that's playing in Canada. Yeah, so there are 3-4 different ways to watch the film right now. Again, go to the website firstvote.film.com and you can find all of the information there. Sorry, Nicholas, what was your second question?
Well, the second question is what's next? What do you, I guess, what are some ideas or projects you're thinking about doing next?
Yeah, I have a couple ideas. I definitely, are in very early stages, and it's kind of I'm still waiting to see because of COVID, right? I'm still waiting to see like when I can go back to production. But I've been really focused on the distribution and impact for the film. So doing community screenings like this one, doing panel discussions, and after election, I really want to focus on getting the film into classrooms and building resources for teachers. So if any of you members work at a university or know anybody who might be interested, teachers or students, definitely get in touch with me. I would love to get your feedback or ideas in terms of how the film I can build resources, educational resources for teachers. And again, there's an audience survey. So if you've seen the film, because everything is virtual now, so it's kind of hard for me to get feedback. That's why we created this survey to really get feedback from audience. So it would be great if you can fill out the survey. That would be really helpful. Oh, and follow us on social media, First Vote Film.
Hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay,
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead and put the Twitter, social media stuff in the chat box if anyone has that there. So, right. So just kind of, I did want to give a moment. If there's any questions from the audience, we can kind of turn to that. I didn't think so. There was none in the chat box there. So,
actually, I can ask one more question. Yeah. Yi, so can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in terms of, even being like a woman filmmaker and like going into, the Chinese American identity or immigrant status, then turning into an American citizen. I mean, what has that journey been like for you? Was it a lot of growth and learning? If you can share.
Yeah, it's a lot of growth and learning. One of the things that I think that I was going through was exactly that transition from being an immigrant and now becoming American, but also the Asian American identity, right? What that means, and so actually going to Jennifer's classes. I learned so much. I never took Asian American studies classes. Although I'm aware of some of Asian American history, but there are so many things that I learned in her class. And I read books like Leslie Bowes' Partly Colored and Ian Haney Lopez's book White by Law. Just kind of learning, how race is a legal and social construct. And so, yeah, her classes are so interesting, and it was free education for me, which was great. it's like classes I never got to, because I came here as a graduate student. So like typically I think you take this type of class as an undergraduate. So, a lot of times immigrants like me who came here for grad school, we really don't have the opportunity to take classes like these, right? So, so it's a huge learning process for me as well to understand, really to understand more about Asian American identity, and yeah, so it's really being a learning process for me as well.
Thank you.
Yes. And thank you so much, Yi Chen, for talking us today. It's been like a real pleasure having you here. It really brings the film to life, and for me at least, it's very enlightening. Like hearing about these characters in real life, and what they're doing now, and how they're taking kind of the content of the film and living it and things like that. So it's also very inspiring, I think, for us, as AAPIs ourselves, and as organizers in our respective countries and things like that. And really tremendous work that you're doing. So we really appreciate your time. It's also very late there. Is that correct? You're in Los Angeles right now, or DC?
Yeah, right now I'm in Northern California, so it's
okay.
like 8:47, which is
Okay.
It's Friday, so.
Right. Thanks for spending your Friday evening with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all our panelists, Kim, in Shanghai, and Nick in Hong Kong. Thank you again for spending your Saturday afternoon with us to kind of ask these questions. Just kind of to wrap up here, some final notes and some reminders. Just please make sure to take the survey in the link, and we'll probably post that on our social media channels as well. If you have seen the film, please do take the time to help the director get that feedback as well. Also, please make sure to donate what you can at the link at democratsabroad.org/AAPI caucus. The link is there as well. This will help cover the film licensing for us. So again, yeah, thank you for everyone, and thank you for the attendees that did show up, and those of you that are joining after this recording. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at future AAPI events. So thank you so much. Bravo to everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
congratulations on your film.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you all. Okay. Bye.